luxury resorts, private islands, and five-star cruises. These trips promise escape, indulgence, and peace. But behind the postcard-perfect views and turquoise waters, some vacations ended in ways no one could have imagined. In this video, we're diving into 5 chilling cases where dream getaways turned into real-life nightmares. These weren't just tragic accidents. They were violent, bizarre, and in some cases still cloaked in mystery.
Justice almost a decade in the making. Heather Mack has been sentenced to almost 26 years in prison.
The Oak Park woman pleaded guilty to helping kill her own mother during a vacation in Bali in 2014.
It was August 12, 2014 in Nusa Dua, Bali. At the opulent St. Regis Resort, 62-year-old Sheila von Wiese Mack was supposed to be enjoying a peaceful vacation with her daughter, 18-year-old Heather. But behind the silk sheets and ocean breeze, something was terribly off. Sheila wasn't just any tourist. Back home in Chicago, she was a respected figure in elite circles, the widow of renowned jazz composer James L. Mack, and someone who, despite her wealth, was fiercely protective of her daughter. And Heather? Well, Heather had secrets. She was pregnant. She hadn't told her mother everything. She didn't just bring her baggage to Bali. She brought her boyfriend. 21-year-old Tommy Schaefer arrived quietly, slipping into the resort with a business-class ticket secretly purchased using Sheila's credit card. Sheila had no idea he was coming. She'd spent months trying to separate her daughter from him, moving houses, changing routines, even uprooting her life in an attempt to shield Heather from what she believed was a dangerous relationship. But Heather and Tommy weren't ready to let go. In fact, they had a plan. The night Tommy arrived, hotel surveillance caught a tense scene in the lobby. He and Sheila arguing, their body language tight with fury. What followed wasn't impulsive. It was months in the making. Back in Chicago, Heather and Tommy had exchanged chilling text messages about killing Sheila. They'd even offered $50,000 to Tommy's cousin to find someone to carry it out. Tommy would later claim that during the argument, Sheila threatened to harm the unborn baby. "That's when," he said. He snapped. He grabbed a heavy metal fruit bowl from the room and began to strike Sheila again and again until she collapsed. Her face bloodied, her breath gone. The forensic evidence showed brutal facial injuries. Heather didn't stop him. She helped clean up. They wrapped Sheila's body in a hotel bed sheet, stuffed it into a suitcase. They had to force it shut, and in doing so, they broke her neck. They wheeled the suitcase through the pristine halls of the 5-star resort. No one suspected a thing until the blood started leaking. A taxi driver noticed it first, red seeping from the suitcase into his trunk. Alarmed, he alerted hotel staff, who quickly called the police. But by the time officers arrived, Heather and Tommy had vanished. They fled to a nearby hotel, thinking maybe they'd bought themselves some time. They hadn't. Less than 24 hours later, they were caught. People back home were stunned. Between 2010 and 2013, police had been called to the Mack household a staggering 86 times. Domestic disturbances, missing person reports. Most of them involved Heather. She'd already spent time in juvenile detention, had psychiatric evaluations, and been known to lash out violently. But through it all, Sheila never gave up on her daughter. She tried everything: therapy, structure, even isolation. And yet, on this trip, the very one meant to rescue their bond, Heather sealed her mother's fate. Sheila had been recovering from a fall earlier in the trip. She was resting, vulnerable. That's when Heather booked Tommy's flight. Hours after he arrived, her mother was dead. When the case went to trial, the revelations kept coming. Heather wasn't some manipulated teen. She had been actively involved in the planning. The motive? Some believed it was control. Others pointed to greed. Heather thought she stood to inherit up to $11 million. That inheritance would later help fund her defense. $150,000 of it, in fact. Money from Sheila's own estate. Tommy was sentenced to 18 years. Heather, surprisingly, only got 10. In prison, she thrived in ways that seemed unsettling, joining dance groups, learning languages, even working as a translator. Tommy, on the other hand, struggled, isolated, beaten, angry. In a 2019 interview, he expressed remorse. Heather didn't, at least not at first. In 2017, she posted a video in which she said she didn't regret what happened. Then, in 2021, Heather walked out of prison early for good behavior. The moment she touched U.S. soil, federal agents were waiting. She was arrested again. In court, she finally apologized to her family. Her uncle Bill said it was the first time she'd done so, but even then, he wasn't sure she meant it. Today, Heather sits in a U.S. federal prison, sentenced to 26 years. Tommy is still locked up in Indonesia, and the little girl they brought into the world, Stella, is now 10, living with Sheila's niece in Colorado. She's cut off all contact with her mother. After years of fighting, Heather gave up her claim to the inheritance. That money now belongs to Stella. It was May 30, 2025 in northern Namibia. Bernd Kebbel, a 59-year-old German-born businessman and devoted conservationist, had come not as a tourist, but as someone who'd spent years protecting one of nature's rarest wonders, Namibia's desert-adapted lions. This was sacred ground to him. He wasn't alone. His wife, Connie, 57, was by his side, along with friends and 6 children. They traveled in 3 four-wheel drives, each with rooftop tents meant to keep them safe from predators. That night, they set up camp near the Hwaneb Skeleton Coast, a final frontier for the desert lions. The stars were bright, the silence deep. It felt like the perfect end to a long day, but death was close. Around 1:30 a.m., Bernd climbed down from the tent to use the toilet. A routine moment, but just feet away, hidden in the dark, a lioness was waiting. Her name was Charlie. She was 12, old, skeletal, starving. Her ribs stuck out like bones through paper. Once featured in wildlife documentaries, Charlie had grown desperate and had lost her fear of humans. The moment Bernd touched the ground, she pounced. Her jaws sank into his neck. She dragged him into the brush. It happened so fast, so silently, no one noticed, until Connie woke to strange sounds. Then she heard her husband's voice, faint and terrified, followed by a growl. She scrambled down the ladder. In the dark, she saw it, Charlie dragging Bernd's lifeless body away. Without hesitation, Connie ran toward the lioness. She grabbed a metal pole and began striking her. She screamed, fought, and even tried to rip off Charlie's leather tracking collar. Another camper arrived and hit the lioness with a flashlight. Finally, Charlie backed off into the dark, but it was too late. Bernd had died almost instantly. The camp was paralyzed with fear. No one slept. The children cried. Adults sat in shock. And then, Charlie came back. She circled the vehicles, growling, pretending to charge. The group huddled inside, afraid to move. The next night, Charlie struck again, this time at a nearby camp. She shredded a tent, clawing and biting through it. Footage later showed the damage. She wasn't just hungry, she had become a threat. Namibia's Ministry of Environment launched an investigation. On June 1st, just 2 days later, they found Charlie resting under a bush. She was put down that morning. Connie later spoke publicly. She said they had come to terms with it, that she and Bernd never wanted Charlie to die. They had loved this land too deeply, but the wild had turned against them. Locals called Connie a hero, a woman who ran at a lioness and lived. A safari guide who knew them said, few people could face a lion and survive, but Connie did. Only around 60 desert-adapted lions remain in Kunene, fewer than 800 across Namibia. Their habitat is vanishing, their prey disappearing. And when desperation sets in, even sacred ground becomes deadly. Bernd had spent years trying to protect that balance. He funded conservation teams, supported researchers like Dr. Philip Flip Stander, and even had a lion named Kebbel in his honor, though it too had to be put down for safety. He also owned the off-road center in Windhoek, supplying safari gear and supporting ecotourism. After the tragedy, his children, Deer and Heidi, returned from South Africa to be with their mother. Authorities confirmed Bernd's death. Campers had tried to help, but it happened too fast. Namibia lost a protector, the desert lost a lioness, and Connie, she lost her partner, in the very place he loved most.
2 British men and their Russian guide died while on a fishing expedition in Russia's Murmansk region on Sunday morning after being struck by their helicopter's rotor.
It was Sunday morning in 2013, deep within the Arctic Circle. Eurocopter EC-120 descended toward the frozen wilderness of Russia's remote Kola Peninsula. This wasn't just any destination. It was a secret haven for the world's wealthiest fishermen, where people paid thousands to cast lines into pristine rivers under untouched skies. On board were 3 men: Rupert Beaumont, a 69-year-old retired London lawyer, Mark Robertson, also 69, a fine art dealer, and their 53-year-old Russian guide, Alexander Tushnikov, an experienced Arctic expedition leader. For Rupert and Mark, this was the trip of a lifetime. Rupert, once a key figure in the Barings Bank scandal fallout, had traded courtrooms for calm waters. His son, James, was flying just behind them in a second helicopter. Everything had been meticulously arranged. The Eurocopter was chosen for its modern safety features. It was June, peak salmon season. Conditions were ideal. But the Arctic doesn't care for perfect plans. The pilot, Alexander Shabalin, a 25-year veteran, began descent near the Rinda River, beside a high-end fishing lodge. The terrain looked stable. It wasn't. As the skids touched down, one wheel sank into the marsh. The aircraft tipped sharply. Rotor blades, still spinning, dropped low, too low. In a blink, the unthinkable happened. Rupert, Mark, and Alexander had just stepped out, likely stretching their legs. Then the blade swept through them. There was no time to react. All three died instantly. From above, James watched it happen. The sudden tip, the chaos, the silence that followed. His father was gone before he even landed. Photos later showed the helicopter crumpled on its side, rotors twisted and bloodied, white snow stained red. The peaceful camp transformed in an instant. The pilot survived with minor injuries and radioed for help, but it was already too late. At first, there was talk of mechanical failure or weather, but soon focus shifted. Did the pilot misjudge the ground? Try to lift off too soon? Russia's investigative committee launched a full inquiry. Conflicting witness statements and Shabalin's own account raised suspicion. A criminal case was opened. If found responsible, the pilot faced up to 10 years in prison. One report suggested the victims were struck not while landing, but during an attempted takeoff. Either way, the soft ground had betrayed them. Rupert wasn't just a vacationer. He was a revered legal mind. Friends called him sharp, kind, and generous. Mark was a quiet but respected figure in the art world. Their guide, Alexander, was beloved in the fishing community and trusted by international travelers. And then, all three were gone. The British Foreign Office confirmed the deaths. Rupert's wife, Susie, flew from Australia to Russia to be with their son. The grief was immeasurable. The Kola Peninsula had become a go-to destination for elite anglers. Remote, pristine, and only reachable by air. But that same remoteness came with risk. On that Arctic morning, in a place meant to offer peace, 3 lives were erased by a single misstep.
What started as a family cruise to celebrate an anniversary ended in a murder investigation. A husband charged with killing his wife while their children were nearby.
It was July 25, 2017. The Emerald Princess, a towering luxury cruise ship, drifted through the icy waters of Alaska. On board were Kenneth and Christy Manzanares from Utah, celebrating their 18th wedding anniversary. Alongside them were their 3 daughters and extended family. A trip meant to mark nearly 2 decades of love and togetherness. But beneath the surface of smiles and scenic views, something was unraveling. Their cabin, D726, looked ordinary. But behind its door, tension had been simmering. Christy, 39, was known for her warmth and devotion to her kids. She'd hoped the trip might bring peace. Instead, it revealed how broken things had become. That night, Christy told Kenneth she wanted a divorce. She asked him to leave the ship at the next port. Kenneth told the girls to go to the next cabin. They obeyed, until they heard their mother scream. They ran to the balcony and saw Kenneth on top of Christy, beating her. He didn't stop, not even when the blood came. Her brother burst in, finding Kenneth dragging Christy toward the balcony. He stopped him just in time. Security arrived. Medics tried to save Christy, but the trauma to her head and face was fatal. Kenneth stood there, blood-covered and blank. One passenger recalled a barefoot girl screaming down the hallway. Some thought it was part of the night's murder mystery dinner. It wasn't. Kenneth was arrested when the ship docked. He first pleaded not guilty, then took a plea deal. He claimed Christy laughed at him and he snapped, but prosecutors pointed to a pattern: past outbursts, property damage, restraint. His lawyers cited brain injuries, bipolar disorder, and a mix of alcohol and meds. Judge Timothy Burgess called the act senseless and tragic, especially with the children so close. Kenneth got 30 years in federal prison, plus 5 more of supervised release. No parole, but he never served it. Months later, he was found unresponsive in his Juneau jail cell. Paramedics couldn't revive him. He was 43. No foul play was suspected, and the cause of death was never disclosed. The Emerald Princess continued sailing. Cabin D726 was cleaned and reused. But for Christy's family, the ship became a ghost. The daughters lost both parents, one to violence, the other to a jail cell and a silent death. It was February 22, 2025, in the quiet coastal town of San Pedro, Belize. The sun rose over the Royal Cajal Beach Resort, a luxury escape known for its white sands, turquoise waters. Kawar Nakad, 23, Imani Mala, 24, Wafi Elar, 26. They had come from Massachusetts to soak in the sun, celebrate life, and make memories together. Friends back home described them as kind, ambitious, full of laughter and light. Their flight home was scheduled for the next day. Their bags were packed, but something went terribly wrong. On the morning of February 21st, hotel staff noticed something strange. None of the women had been seen since the day before. Surveillance confirmed they had entered their suite and never left. Housekeeping knocked. No answer. The next morning, still nothing. When the staff finally entered the room, they found all 3 women unresponsive. The room was still, no signs of violence, no struggle, just 3 vibrant lives gone. First responders arrived quickly, but there was nothing they could do. The women were pronounced dead at the scene. A vacation that began in celebration had ended in an inexplicable tragedy. The news stunned everyone. Belize police launched an investigation. Commissioner Chester Williams gave a public statement mentioning that alcohol, vape pens, and gummies had been found in the room, but nothing illegal. He speculated that the women may have consumed something toxic. That explanation didn't sit right with their families. They knew these women. That theory didn't fit. An initial autopsy in Belize listed the cause of death as acute pulmonary edema, fluid in the lungs. But why? How? There were no answers. Their bodies were flown back to Massachusetts for a second autopsy as the families pushed for clarity. Weeks later, a strange twist emerged. A woman using the alias Jane had checked into the Royal Cahal on March 1st, unaware of what had happened just days before. Concerned for her safety, she called ahead. A hotel staff member named Daniel reassured her. The deaths, he said, were an isolated incident. She believed him. But on the 5th day of her stay, Jane woke up dizzy with a numb leg and blurred vision. When she stood, she collapsed. For nearly 40 minutes, she couldn't move. Back home, the symptoms lingered. Headaches, confusion, vision loss. She didn't know what had happened until she started reading about carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide is a silent killer, odorless, invisible. It can leak from fuel-powered appliances and builds up fast in enclosed spaces. The symptoms matched. Jane reported her experience to the U.S. Embassy. A friend later told her that some rooms at the Royal Cahal had tested for dangerously high carbon monoxide levels, but the embassy stayed quiet. Then came another voice. A guest named Nana H. had stayed at the resort just before the women were found. Her personal carbon monoxide detector had gone off. Over 400 parts per million, an extremely dangerous level. She reported it to hotel staff. Their response, confused and unprepared. Under mounting pressure, Belizean officials ran environmental tests. This time, they found some rooms with readings as high as 500 parts per million, more than 10 times the maximum safe level. The danger had been real, and it had been there all along. On March 26th, the truth was confirmed. Kawar, Imani, and Wafi had died from carbon monoxide poisoning. Toxicology reports showed their blood carried over 60% carboxyhemoglobin, a fatal level. No other substances were found. The initial speculation, the assumptions, the dismissals, it had all been wrong. Their families released a joint statement filled with heartbreak and fury. How, they asked, could such a basic safety failure claim 3 young lives? How could no one have noticed? How could it take a second tragedy, nearly, for the truth to surface? The Royal Cahal Beach Resort quietly shut its doors, but the silence that killed those women still echoes. It wasn't a freak accident. It wasn't bad luck. It was preventable, and it was missed by people who should have known better.